You're listening to Lucid Cafe. I'm your host, Wendy Halley. Hello and welcome back. How are you doing out there? Doing all right? I'm doing pretty good. I just took my first week off since 2015. I'm a great poster child for wellness. uh, don't follow my example. In today's episode, I speak with Greer about his new book, The Necktie and the Jaguar, a memoir to help you change your story and find fulfillment. Carl is a retired clinical psychologist and Jungian analyst, a businessman, and a shamanic practitioner, author, and philanthropist. He's the best-selling, award-winning author of Change Your Story, Change Your Life, and Change the Story of Your Health. We covered a lot of ground in this conversation. If you're a regular listener, you probably noticed that I'm quite fascinated with the nature of evil. So I explored that with Carl. And then, after what seemed to be the end of the interview, he switched things up and started asking me deeper questions about my perspective on evil. So, if you get to what seems like the end, it's not. So please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Carl Greer. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Wendy.
Oh, of course. We seem to have some common threads in our lives. Psychology, martial arts, and shamanism. I would love to hear just maybe the overview of your path, your career path, and anything you feel would be helpful to know what led you to write your memoir.
I had written a couple of books, and in some of those I put a little bit of my story, but not too much. And some friends asked me some questions about my life after those books, as did my family. Some of the stories that they'd heard, they wanted to learn a little bit more about it. So over a period of time, I was putting down things, mostly for my own reflections and for that small group. And then as I kept working on it, I thought perhaps it might be useful for a larger audience. But to have that be the case, I wanted to have ways the readers could reflect on their own lives as part of the process. So at the end of each chapter, I have questions for the readers to ponder if they so choose to do that. So that's what kind of started me. And I think the whole process started when I was realizing I had a lot less time to live than I've been living. And, facing some health issues, I kind of accelerated the process. In the last year and a half, I had bypass surgery for blocked arteries, and I had some radiation treatments for cancer. And so I was thinking, now's a good time to get that out. And you referred to our similarities in stories, psychology, martial arts, shamanism. For me, they came relatively late in my life because I had been a Midwestern kid growing up, and where the values for men were basically to graduate school, college preferably, but back then, less people went to college than do today, and get a good job, have a family. If you were lucky, get home at 5 to 6 and drink some beer, work in the yard, the weekends, maybe play golf and work for the same company for 50 years and retire, and life goes on.
The American dream.
Yeah, for that.
For that
group.
period, yeah.
Yeah, and I started out like that, but I early on had inklings of wanting to do something else. And as a high school kid, I thought they would not serve me, to kind of, I called it in my book, my mythopoetic part. I thought I'd have to burn that out somehow because I didn't think it would be useful. I was all into practicality. And so I ended up going to college in metallurgical engineering, which I thought was the best way to try to head it away. Although years later, I learned the similarities between metallurgy and alchemy, which can be a metaphorically powerful idea. And then from that college experience, I decided I'd get even more practical experience. So I went to Columbia University to get an MBA. I didn't do that. I stayed there and got my doctorate, ended up teaching in the graduate school of business for 9 semesters. Had a chance to work for an oil company in the Chicago area, and I've been affiliated with them ever since. Some 20, 25 years after starting there, almost 20 years, I decided I would pursue an interest I had in psychology, even as a young kid, and went back to school while I was still working, got my doctor's degree in clinical psychology, and subsequent to that, trained to become a Jungian analyst. And during this whole period, I always had an interest in reading stories about Native Americans and medicine people and shamans. I never really felt I could take the time to apprentice with anybody. And at the age of 60, I kind of actualized that interest and studied for shamanism. And it's been a big part of my life because I've taught it and I've practiced it and I've worked with a lot of shamans in a lot of places since then. And also during this period of time, maybe from my early 20s to now, I've been interested in the martial arts. So those were some extra threads in my life that helped be antidotes to the practical Midwestern guy who started off wanting to do what I said I wanted to do.
All right. Well, I have to say, I think that practicality is still kind of at the forefront of a lot of people's lives now, even. So I'd be curious, given your life experience, what do you have to say about what you learned about living a practical life?
I was fortunate in that I could make changes because I had some financial success in my business. And so some people say, yeah, you could do that, but we really can't, or I can't because I have to do what I'm doing just to make a living. I would say to them, I understand that, but I've really learned to believe for myself and for others, it's really possible to make changes at the margin that can lead to bigger changes. So you can get beyond just the need to be practical if you take time to look at what your story is, whatever it is, as honestly as you can. And then ask yourself, is it working for me? And if it's not, say why it's not or what you'd like it to be. And then be honest as to what those reasons are. And people have many reasons as to why they can't change. We don't have the time, or maybe later on in my life, or the kids get different, or whatever it is.
Or it's hard.
or it's hard. But I've also found that for most of us, there's some part of us that really doesn't want to change. So how do you access that? So some of my other books have talked about how do you get in touch with that part of you that doesn't want to change vis-a-vis the part that does. And so I have practices, shamanic and Jungian, that involve conversations and dialogues with those parts. And then other ways to engage neurobiologically the parts of ourselves and our brain that maybe can help give birth to new behaviors. And because at the end of the day, you can do a lot of analysis, a lot of shaman work, but you still in the next moment, having finished it, have to decide you want to continue to do what you've done before, you want to make some changes as a result of it all. And that's hard, but it's not impossible. So my point is that even if you're not making huge changes, you can make enough little changes, and cumulatively they become big changes, no matter what your resources are, no matter where you are in the spectrum of life and death. And I've seen that, practically speaking, for people who are living with a terminal illness, and they've made changes that have allowed them to be happier and freer than perhaps they've ever been. And they've said that. So it's possible, your words though, but it could be hard.
Yeah, it's not easy. The thing that's interesting to me is that, and I find this with my clients, and I'm wondering if you found it with the folks you've worked with over the years, is that living in the practicality realm, which is all about doing the survival dance, right?
Mm-hmm.
living in that realm, it seems like it's not satisfying enough, that there's usually something underneath that is kind of calling out, because I frequently will get people coming in and saying, I want to figure out what my purpose is.
Mhm.
And they already have maybe a successful career, but there's something missing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've seen that too. And I think people start off by raising that question for themselves, kind of an upper level of the brain. It's not kind of completely affecting them such that they can answer it and then make changes. But it's the start, something's missing. And they may start to think about, why am I here? Where did I come from before I got here? What am I? What am I? Where will I be when I'm no longer here? Can I do something different as a result of answering those questions? So you have the big questions. And then it's been my experience that if people can have an experience of it relativizes their lives, that they see they're part of a bigger interconnected picture, that can start to shift. And what is that like? That can be a shamanic experience. That can be a time in nature where something happens. It can be just a transcendental, synchronistic moment that we in spirit orchestrate. But I think they're available more than we think to us that start to answer the question, besides practicality, is there a spiritual meaning we could connect to in this lifetime? And the means to that end, I think, are working with your unconscious, working with dreams, spending time in nature, and being open to the relativization of our lives, which when we don't do that, we can be all self-absorbed and not be open to the other possibilities.
Right. But still have a longing for something, with the caveat that contemplating your navel is a luxury for some people because they're working so hard just to get by each
Absolutely.
day. Yeah. But for those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to contemplate our navels and strive to have those experiences, it's very powerful and can be transformational. I'm curious, what would you say is the most powerful experience you've had that really got your attention?
It would be hard to say any particular one, but I've had some shamanic experiences in Peru that were transforming for me. But to your point about the people who are very, very busy, surviving, what can they do? My observation has been they can do a few things. One, when they have some free time, they can spend it outside in nature, around water, trees, looking at flowers. Those can be very affecting at a lot of levels. And most anybody can find the time to do that. Another thing they can do is, with the time they have, learn to be a better listener. I've become more and more aware of the power of good listening and how I had to learn how to do it. And a lot of people still haven't learned how to do it. And then just be aware of the moments in between. You're waiting at an elevator, you're waiting at a stoplight. You can start getting frustrated, or you can start breathing. You can learn to do little things in the moment that you didn't do before, no matter how rich you are or how healthy you are, that can change the experience of that moment. And that's a little trial and error. And it's also learning how to do that. So those are things that I think people can do, even if they're working 2 or 3 jobs. I don't want to trivialize having to work 2 or 3 jobs. I know how hard that is, and I know a number of people have to do that. But even with that life, it's possible, I have found by experience working with folks that have that life, to make changes.
Yes, nature is the best medicine. And I think it's free, right?
It is free.
You can just go hang out, sit by a tree, sit on a stone, watch some water go by. I mean, whatever you have at your disposal. One of the things I found is that, especially when they've had a lot of adverse childhood experiences, that they retreated to nature, and that was their medicine when they were kids, to get away from the trauma they were experiencing, that was where they found their solace, in the natural world. And I think that's something, it would be wonderful if we all did that. I mean, no matter what our situation was in life, is that we
Yes.
just found the time to
Yes.
hang out.
Yes.
outside.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And even if you're in a city, go to a park or whatever, right? Hang out by a fire hydrant.
Yeah, there
I'm
are
being
places.
sarcastic. Yeah.
No, but there are places. I mean, I've lived in New York City, I've lived in Chicago, and there's places to be outside in nature in those big cities.
Yeah. Yeah. And then getting to your point about listening, right? There's a lot of wisdom in nature if you get quiet enough and you can start listening.
Sure.
I think that's why we're so drawn to it, because there's just something centering and grounding about hanging out with a bunch of trees
Mm-hmm. True.
or with the stone people or whatever. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Getting back to the other question about your experiences, do you have any cool experiences you'd like to share? Any shamanic
Well,
experiences? I know that you've been through an ayahuasca ceremony. Would you care to talk a little bit about that?
I've been fortunate to be able to have used a lot of the plants over a lot of years, but I've also had a lot of experiences without the plants. But early on, a couple of experiences that I had, which were big for me. One was an ayahuasca experience in the jungle, and it started off kind of a inauspicious way in that we went into the jungle, into a hut, lay down, and as I and the people around me were laying down, all of a sudden people on both sides of me started jumping up screaming before the ceremony started. And I was thinking I had enough concerns about doing the ceremony. Like, what in the world's going on? Well,
Right.
we'd come into a lot of fire ants, and those fire ants, when they get on you, I mean, they can bite. And
Oh man.
so we cleaned them off. We went into another place, and we started the ceremony all over again. And for me, I had heard that you might have some fearsome images or energies coming at you, but if that happens, don't cower or run from them, but kind of face into them. So I did that. Kind of my left brain had some things that I was trying to do in the process, and I had a kaleidoscope of different images. But then I had just a huge noise that went on in my head, and it was kind of like a parting of a membrane that opened me to what I saw was little globules of light connected to that seemed like an infinite number of them. And from that, I got the knowing that everything past, present, future is connected. Everything is connected. And I had a visceral experience of that. And then the night had other miracles for me like that of insights and experiences. Now, again, you could say it's just the result of a psychedelic, but it seemed like there was an intelligence in the plant working with me to give me that insight. And I had just many others that night. Another time that was transformative, I was using the plant San Pedro. And ayahuasca is sometimes referred to as the grandmother plant, and San Pedro's grandfather plant. And I was doing a destiny retrieval, to try to get some sense as to how I could align my energy today with certain future outcomes that would help orient my present decisions better than had I not done the work. But during this experience, I was led into a tunnel, and my energy body went through it, through a crystalline diamond-like membrane, and I came out the other side, and I just knew I was in a place that I called it in that moment the quiet. It was the place before creation. It was the place of pure potential before an idea, before the form of an idea, before the energization of an idea, all pure potential. And so I experienced that visually in my energy and then my physical body. And I subsequently, at the time, I believe that space surrounds us today. I mean, it wasn't just back before the Big Bang. It's around us all the time. And it's the place that people who do energy work, Shama, that's where we work. In other words, to have things manifest in this reality, the one you and I are talking in now, as a result of doing things in that reality. So that was an interesting to me. So those would be two big experiences. In the last part of that experience, the quality of the energy in that experience, Wendy, I had the inkling at the time, but I had another experience that confirmed it for me. It was an agape love energy. It's not like a filial love, but there was a, so when we asked the question, well, how can, God or goddess of love have all the evil in the world, or these kind of things? It gave me a different sense of what I would call the love energy of that place that is bigger than these questions that we're talking about, to kind of orient. We as humans have choice to do this, that, and the other, but we have this quiet, this energy that surrounds us, that influences us, that has a quality of agape love. It's a mystery, and I'm not explaining it very well, but I have a feeling about that. And to tie in my worldview and my creation myth from a Jungian or shamanic standpoint, this place of the one, when people talk about the one and the many in the one, it's the one from which the many come. And then the many, the stone people that you mentioned, or the trees, they have that one in them as well. And the energies that people talk about in Jungian work is archetypes, or, shamans talk about spirit animals or allies. They're all part of this energetic field. We are crystallized energy. We can see each other. Stones are crystallized. But there's another set of energies that some believe are there with an intelligence that can influence how we think, act, and feel. And that would be archetypes in Jungian words. And people say spirits, or however you think about that. And they are related to too. So back to your earlier question about how can people get out of the practical and get into a bigger sense of purpose. If we can learn to relate to those energies in any kind of respectful, meaningful way, some of them are malign, not so friendly to us, and some aren't, but they're all there. I mean, they all are our energies. And if we can learn to relate to all of them, or more than we otherwise do, we can enrich our lives, in my opinion.
Very powerful experiences you've had. I have a couple of questions. First one is, how would you say you were transformed in response to those experiences? Having an experience of the one and the many, and having this experience of, I guess, what I would call the sea of possibilities, this place of quiet, I think you referred to it as. Yeah. How would you say these transformed you? Because it's more than just an intellectual insight, right? It's a place that you went to, something that you actually directly experienced.
Yes. Well, how does one think about transforming? I guess one way you think about it, you do different things in the world. You think about things differently. I mean, kind of what's the result of a transformation? And after these experiences, and I've learned to appreciate the mysteries, and I'm not as good as I used to be because I was, I think, wrong. And I would say this caused this and so forth. I was better able to, I could say I had this experience and therefore this happened, but I could have been wrong on this. Now I see it was just part of some series of events orchestrated in part by me with the journey, but just from larger forces that put together caused me to change the way I spent my everyday life. Instead of, for example, being driven to achieve, compete, accumulate, which was part of that Midwestern ethic and part of my psychology, that became less important to me. And for a period of time, some years, maybe 20, I reoriented a lot of my thinking around those things. So now I'm trying to find ways to give back. And to that end, I have shifted my emphasis, and I've really rearranged my life to spend more time giving back and reorienting my resources in significant ways to not only give back as significantly as I can while I'm alive, but to see that follows me afterwards. So those would be some specific things that I did as a result of those experiences, I believe. But they were also a function of my own psychological work, my shamanic work, just my life work and my business things and my relationship things and my children and my health, and this big mixture of all these events in my life all got together such that I was able to be motivated and actually make everyday changes in my life that I don't think I would have had I didn't have. And I don't know which of the pieces caused which, but together, and the shamanic pieces were certainly big pieces, but not the only piece. That's a long-winded answer. But it was a complex, in my mind, it was a complex thing to think about.
Well, yeah, it's hard to put this stuff into words. The experiences themselves and then how they impact you. You did a good job trying to put words to these very personal, kind of intimate experiences that you don't always have words for. The thing that strikes me about having these transpersonal experiences is that they remind me of what people have reported when they've had near-death experiences. Right?
Mm-hmm.
After they've had a near-death experience, they've come back and now they're less materialistic. They're more focused on the environment. They try to be kinder. They try to be more respectful of the earth and everyone around them. They're less religious, maybe more spiritual. Those are some of the statistics that have come out of near-death experience research. I just wanted to comment on how I realized there was that parallel there, because these experiences, I frequently will say, you can't have a conversation with a tree and then be the same after that.
Yes.
One of the other things that got my attention that you said, I like to ask different people this question. You talked about maligned forces.
Yes.
Do you have experience with maligned forces and how do you understand them?
Oh, it's a metaphysical question and a psychological question and a shamanic question. If you're doing a journey, a shamanic journey, you might go to some place where you'll encounter something that when you have a conversation with it, may have things to say that are harmful to you. So if you let that have any airtime, it can not be good. You can have a dream image, where some part of your unconscious is there, and there can be a nightmarish conversation. And if you talk to that, it can say, I want to hurt you, you're not doing this right, and so on and so forth. And many of us want to go like that to those energies and say, well, we'll overcome you with the light, or we'll do this, that, and the other, and have protections around them. But others would say, it's an experience that we had, so we can't discount that. What can we do to maybe get some information about that? So you have a conversation, and the strength of the conversation is that you don't have to do what that energy says. The person that's having the conversation, your ego consciousness, can say, hey, look, I hear what you're saying. I disagree. I'm not going to talk to you anymore for these reasons, and kind of terminate it like that. Now, it depends on the energy and its forcefulness and the psychological strength of the person that's having it. But that can help and can work and can transform that energy, because sometimes it needs the airtime to be heard, and then all of a sudden it has a different form, because in some ways it just wants you to pay attention to it, because there's a chance for change. So that's one thing. Another way to think about that is, let's say somebody is more psychotic and they don't have the ability of the ego consciousness to kind of shut off some of that, and it keeps coming at you. That's a little different thing. It doesn't mean that the experience is, but it's just harder to contain that. And that's why people have psychotic medication. I mean, some of this you can't do. Now, some would say there are external to us, like demons that are running around, that can, in many parts of the world, we would think about that, can get into our energy fields. And that is the subject of sorcery and anti-sorcery and exorcisms. And those are phenomenological things that have happened to people. What you do when that happens, there's certain shamanic approaches to working with those to extract them and set those energy free and kind of see what they're about. And so in all those cases, those are examples, Wendy, for malign forces that coexist for many people. I believe certainly that we can have those things inside of us. I don't disbelieve, because I've seen the effects of these things in people where they've been, myself and others, extracted. How much from their own psychology, their own experiences, how much there's past lives involved. I don't disbelieve that, and how much there's energies out there. But I'm coming from the place of a loving agape loving universe. That's my experience of the quiet. And I've not seen in my own experience situations where working with these energies has not been enough. In other words, I'm saying it has been enough. Now, maybe I have just not personally experienced enough people who have been infected by demons that can't do that. But I've had some pretty severe situations that are in this spectrum.
It's a fascinating area for me over the years. I mean, because my shamanic training, as I think most shamanic training, revolves around this idea that there are these, one of my favorite words, entities out there that can harm us.
Yes.
Makes me wonder if the training or the framework for these entities, if that creates the filter for which you're explaining these things. I only say that because I had some experiences where people were saying they were possessed or cursed. And then I actually diverted from my training and asked a more general question instead of assuming that there was a demon in this person or aliens or whatever they were saying it was. I asked, help me understand what it is that's going on with this person. And I saw a much different thing. I've done a lot of field work around this, and I haven't personally seen evidence of these dark forces out there. I think that humans can be really, really fucking horrible to one another.
Sure.
And that those can be intrusive, like someone saying something terrible to you and you can absorb that and that becomes a part of your psyche, right? But I don't know. I guess I'm an outlier in the shamanic world. I also feel like it's kind of the opposite of shamanism, which is all about reconnecting with personal power. And if you feel like at any moment something can attack you, then that puts you in this place of having to be on guard and that you're a victim. And that's the opposite. If you have a sense of personal power, then to me is the antithesis of what that's about. So to believe that that's a possibility to me is like a reflection of powerlessness, to believe that I'm vulnerable to these forces out there. That's just my take. I mean, you may totally disagree with it, but.
Well, it's interesting. It's all on how you're thinking about it, how you're framing it. Because in your example, you said, gee, if shamanism is about personal power, and then we acknowledge that we have these things out there, doesn't that make us more of a victim? Framing it like that, you come to a certain answer. But if you say, gee, shamanism is about personal power, and because we're learning to claim our personal power, then yes, even if we acknowledge we have these energies around us, we're not going to be a victim of it because we're learning through shamanism to access our personal power, which is what? We're connected to this life force. At the end of the day, the worst that's going to happen to us is we die, which we're going to do anyway. And in between, with all of our shamanic work or psychological work, hopefully we have allies. And hopefully we have some sense of our own strength. And it's something thy will be done. And sometimes I got to walk that lonesome valley. I got to walk it by myself. And we learn to tease out all those moments. And that's an act of power, knowing that sometimes there are things in and around us that may be more than we can handle. For example, you got a cancer, you have to deal with it. You have people having a bomb in your neighborhood and you get blown. There's a lot of unpredictable things in this world. A pandemic, 1,500 people are dying each day. So,
oh yeah, no, life on planet Earth is not easy. It's absolutely not easy. One of the things I failed to mention about this sort of perspective is that I really see the shamanic realm as the realm of the symbolic, which is very Jungian. And these symbols, so if there's some sort of evil force out there, it has something to tell you, kind of like one of the branches you were describing, like you could learn from that thing that's trying to invade or has invaded you. What does it have to tell you? What story does it have? Looking at it through the symbolic lens, it's a teaching.
Yes, it's all working with those things. It's all a way to get information and energy. And the energy that we spend keeping them down is some South American shamanic traditions. They don't like to think about that things are inherently evil. They would say there's heavy energy and there's light energy.
Yeah.
Pucha is heavy energy. Sami is kind of light energy. And that's one way to think about them. But sometimes you can see a shaman who can say all that, can also drink too much and hit people, or do what we would call not nice things. And,
exactly.
Because we're human, and it's just, can we somehow deal with all of these vicissitudes, however you think about them? And back to my creation myth that everything came from this place called the quiet. That means that we're acknowledging that there's other energies in the universe besides just this earth. And I have to believe that there's sentient life, other places that in some ways relates to us. And that sounds kind of kooky, but I think that we have these fields around us, just like you're saying, hey, you can interact with nature in ways that some people may think is funny sounding. I believe that nature is observing us in some way, just as we are observing her. But I also think that these energies and aliens, and however you think about that, and allies, they're not just figments of an imagination. So we're in the midst of all these energies. We're built so that we're not, in my opinion, tormented and agitated by them all the time. Otherwise, we'd be kind of go nuts. But I don't think we can discount them as completely fictitious.
All right. Do you want to quickly, before we sign off, talk a little bit about your other two books, Change Your Story, Change Your Life, and Change the Story of Your Health? What was the motivation for writing these two books?
It's this idea that we don't have to be trapped into a life story that somebody else has written for us, that we have no change. And what I was saying, if you can start off asking yourself the question, what is the life that I'm living and am I happy with it? And then you've kind of answered that question. But if you're not, say, I'm really truthfully honest, not the story that I want other people to hear, not the one I want to tell myself, but my true story is one that I'd like to make some changes in. I'm not able to. What are some ways that I might be able to change that I haven't thought of? That's when I introduce shamanic and Jungian ideas to work with transpersonal realms, call them the unconscious, that are practical ways that people can try to use that work to bring it into their everyday. That's a practical way to get the yoga off the mat, to kind of make those everyday changes, both of them. The health book came after the first book because people just seem to have a lot of health questions. So besides just going to allopathic medicine and just energy medicine or homeopathic medicine, this is some ways to work with these realms, your inner healer and other energies, to get information and energy to change that can be helpful in many cases, in my experience.
So given that, how is your health these days?
Well, I'm 81, surviving longer than almost anybody in my family. I had complete blockages a year ago, January, on the left side of my heart, and couldn't put stents in or anything. So the only thing they could do was to replace arteries. So I'm feeling pretty good in that regard. I've had prostate cancer for a number of years. It's progressed such that I had to do the radiation treatments. So far, I'm functioning, and that's good.
Okay, you had mentioned it earlier in the conversation. I wanted to follow up and see how you're feeling.
I'm active, but aware of the COVID issues. I'm looking forward to getting my third shot when I can back into the world, and I'm feeling good.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Well, Carl, what's the best way for people to learn more about your work or your books?
I have a website, carlgreer.com, and my books are on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and bookstores. Those would be the things I'd say about that.
All right. And I will put a link to your website in the show notes.
I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and having this chat with me.
We talked about a lot of things.
Yes, we did. Yeah. We covered a lot of ground. I appreciate that.
Speaking for myself, I don't know any of the answers to this. I've had some experiences that have caused me to say what I've said. But what is the ultimate unraveling of the mystery? I think at some point when we go to our next phase after we die, we'll maybe get some more insights. I think we probably will.
So that means I won't hold you to anything that you said then today.
If we meet on the in the afterlife, we can compare and say, hey, remember that question about those bad entities?
Yeah.
What do you think now?
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a challenge. Well, that's even if there is an afterlife. It is still all the great mystery, right? At this point in the game, with all of the experiences I've had, I'd be shocked if there isn't one. But
yes,
but I'm open to the possibility that there's nothing.
So what do you think about inherent evil as an energy that surrounds us?
Again, I think that humans can be really evil to one another. I haven't seen evidence or experienced evidence, because I've looked, of evil in the universe. I've seen light and I've seen darkness,
Okay.
but I haven't seen maliciousness. I haven't seen that. It doesn't mean that it's not there,
So what caused then within humans to be evil? Where does that come from?
Human nature.
And where does that come from?
I'm fond of saying that the human race is not very highly evolved. And so I think we come from these really primal drives, the drive for status, for greed, for fame, for sex. Those are the things that lead us to be evil. And then some people, unfortunately, their brains get affected by severe trauma, and they might become sociopathic or psychopathic, or they're maybe born that way. I don't have enough experience or knowledge about that to be able to speak to it. But yeah, I think inherently we can be plenty evil. Not that I believe that we are inherently evil. I think we have the capacity to be really unkind and sometimes evil to one another.
Could you think about that as an energy? I mean, there is an evil energy that some people have and put out there.
My take on energy is probably a little different too, is that I see that as the kind of in between the dream time, the realm of consciousness, which to me is the realm of intelligence.
Okay.
And the physical realm in between that is the energetic realm that brings the two together. So they're all intricately connected.
Sure.
So in the realm of consciousness, it starts with maybe an intention, which travels into the energetic and gathers form, mass, and then pops out into the physical as an experience. So that's kind of the framework that I use. So when people say energies and stuff like that, I guess I don't think of it in the same way.
What would you think is possible? So within kind of our humanness, you have the intelligence, body, energy, but how about surrounding us? Are there energies, as you kind of envision it, that interact with us?
Yeah. Well, yeah, everything is to me alive with consciousness and intelligence, and then that has its own energetic imprint or reflection. And so I think it's all kind of intricately intertwined, but I do see them as separate, like the realm of consciousness and the energetic realm is a reflection or a shadow of that, which has an experiential quality in the physical realm, in our everyday life. I don't know if I described that very well, but
you did. But so this energy surrounding us, you would not think has any inherent. I mean, the archetype, or would say these could be archetypes, some of which are more malign than others. An archetype, and that can hook us at our human level and feed some of the evil acts. That would be one theory, as opposed to it's all within humans that have an unevolved space that allows some of us to be overridden by these drives, these primal drives, you're saying, to do what we would describe as evil things, as opposed to being kind of triggered by them based on our DNA and our life experiences.
Yeah, I think as of right now, based on how I'm thinking it today,
yes,
that I'd have to say that I don't see us being influenced by external evil forces. I don't see that.
Okay.
But I mean, that's just where I live. I think the realm of consciousness, the dream time, the spirit world, whatever you want to call it, to me, that's all the same. That is the realm of the archetypes. And you can interact with it and have relationships with it, just as you can in the physical realm. You can have relationships with other humans, with other aspects of nature, the water spirits, the tree spirits, the stone people, like I was saying before. And then up in the heavens, the stars, the planets, you can have relationships with all of these different intelligences, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure my metaphysical, things as to how many external energies there are, the way they're all internalized. However, from a Jungian standpoint, they talk about the collective unconscious. It's this where the archetypes reside, that we're all connected to this field. So it's not so much our personal. So we are connected in a field that has all these archetypal energies in it that we're influenced in different ways by, based on our upbringing, our DNA, and a variety of things that we precipitate certain kind of archetypal energies into us. So if you think about it like that, is the collective unconscious outside of us, or is it somehow all inside of us, even though it's a collective thing, but it's not like an external energy?
That's a great question. Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah. I've always seen the collective unconscious as being where it dwells is in the lower world, in the shamanic realm or the underworld, whatever you want to call it, that it's this sort of collective of the human memory. Yeah.
But if it's kind of like in some ways the Ein Sof in Judaism, it's like, the primal ground, what I call the quiet, from which everything has come, then it would be, besides the lower world, in that case, it would also be the upper world. It would be this place of connections of everything that was, is, and ever will be. The place in quantum physics where the past, future, and present are entwined in ways that at the macro level we don't quite understand. It would be that place, I think.
To me, the quantum realm is the energetic realm, and then the upper, I think it probably maybe depends on where your focus is tuned, right? I mean, because a lot of spiritual seekers are seeking that experience of oneness, where all the boundaries melt away, that nirvana type experience, but you can't stay there for very long, right? In this human dense experience. Sure. But I think people have had moments maybe on psychedelics or in meditation where they can tune into that and have that experience. And so that now they have that experience there. But then if you tune your focus into the shamanic realm, like doing shamanic journey work, that's a different realm where there's different information. It's more the realm of consciousness and the archetypes and all your allies and all of that. And then if you tune it into the energetic realm, then you're at the realm of frequency, which is light waves, sound waves, all of that.
Right.
And then there's the physical realm. So they're all happening simultaneously.
Right.
So I guess it's just a matter of where we focus our attention. That's where I sit today anyway. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, I think we're trying to address the mysteries, and
they're mysterious.
Yeah, and I think what we're saying makes sense. It makes sense to me without answering any ultimate questions. I mean, I think we're struggling as best we can to understand the mystery.
Right. And that whole kind of framework I just described is based on my experiences. That's all I have to go by. It's not like stuff I read in a book or somebody told it to me and it made sense. It's more like, all right, I've had all of these different types of experiences and this is how I've made sense of it through my pea brain.
Sure.
And it could change tomorrow. It could totally be obliterated next week. And I'm back to square one. Yeah. And it is probably a feeble attempt to make sense of shit that just doesn't make sense.
No. Yeah, I'm struck by, in the martial arts, at least some, besides learning how to win or compete, they say kind of and have to be a good martial artist. You have to know yourself. You have to believe that you're part, of a higher power, and be of service. Kind of the same types of thoughts that some of the great religions have. You got to know yourself. Acknowledge a higher power, somehow have a relationship to it, and be of service. And so we're trying to acknowledge what that higher power is and what kind of relationship to have with it. I don't know if everybody is. What does it mean to know yourself? I mean, we're kind of talking about that, trying to do that in our respective work. And then to be of service. What does that look like for us as people and for others? So we're left with kind of some.
feeble attempts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it gives me the illusion that I have a framework on occasion.
Yeah, right. And that's I agree with you. And I think you believe in it as I believe in mine, even if it's ultimately going to be proven to me to be wrong.
Well, yeah. And I think a lot of it is coming from curiosity, like going into the shamanic realms and being curious and actually having experiences that are surprising, because I maybe had a belief about something and then and have an experience that makes me shift my perspective completely.
Yes.
And it actually helps things to click into place in a way that it wasn't there before. And then that causes a transformation. So I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'm onto something.
Yes.
For myself, at least. And that, of course, informs how I work with people. And it could be complete bullshit, but that's that's where I'm at.
Yes.
But yeah, thanks for taking the deep dive with me into that a little bit more. That was fun to talk about. Food for thought, right?
Amen to that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for having the show, Wendy. It was fun talking to you.
It was fun talking to you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope your head doesn't hurt after listening to us do a little metaphysical wrestling. If you'd like to learn more about Carl and his books, please visit his website, carlgreer.com. A quick note before I sign off. Over the summer, I indexed Lucid Cafe episodes by topic on my website. Pretty smart, huh? So if you're in the mood or looking for a specific topic, lucidpathwellness.com is a good place to go. Thank you for listening and for supporting the podcast in whatever way you can, by giving a positive review, letting others know about the show, making a donation, or by checking out the new offerings at the Lucid Path Etsy shop. Until next time.